So today I'm going to be doing some more lab testing against Garmin's VO2 Max calculator to see how accurate it actually is. I've already done a video once on this to test my Run VO2 Max. We can go back to that video and see just how accurate its Run VO2 Max calculator is, but today I'm going to be doing it on a bike. If their VO2 Max bike calculator is any better than the Run calculator. But more importantly, this lab test that I'm going to be doing is actually going to be doing from home. This is called an INSCYD test, and it's a company called INSCYD. It's INSCYD. They provide basically a lab test that you can do from home with your bike trainer as long as you have power meter and heart rate. It's extremely accurate. It's within basically a margin of error that pro tour teams and pro triathletes around the world consider good enough to be using. Typically within 2.5%, which is kind of a margin of error of even most lab tests. So it's a very accurate test, but I'm more interested in the amount of data that this test is going to give me. It's going to give me essentially everything I need to know about how my body produces power on the bike and how better to train and understand how to optimize my training. So it's going to give me my Fatmax, my VLA Max, my lactate threshold. So it'll give you kind of your LT1 and LT2 points if you're going to use a 3-zone model of just 1, 2, and 3. It gives you your it doesn't give you like your FTP, but it gives you your MLSS, which is essentially it's a more accurate FTP, basically what it is. So you get a ton of data out of this test. So more importantly than finding out about Garmin and how accurate this VO2, also obviously it gives you the VO2 Max. So more importantly than finding out about how accurate or not accurate this is going to be, I'm interested in all this other data. So some details on this test. It's pretty straightforward. The test itself is basically just requires you to do a 20-second sprint, a 3-minute all-out effort, 6-minute all-out effort, and a 12-minute all-out effort. So the test itself isn't anything groundbreaking. It's not anything crazy. They do want you to do there's some specifics. Everything has to be fully seated. And there's some specifics about like your warm-up procedure, how they want you to warm up. And then like for the 20-second sprint, you have to be essentially from a dead stop. It can't be like a rolling sprint. It needs to be essentially just from a dead stop. So there's some procedural things about how you have to collect the data, but otherwise the test itself is pretty straightforward. You can, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it up over 2 days. So first day today, I'm going to be doing my 20-second sprint and 12-minute effort. Tomorrow I'm going to come back and I'll do my 3 and 6-minute effort. The magic of this test obviously is just what they're able to do with this data. So they've developed some software on the back end. I don't know how it works. It's magic as far as I'm concerned, but how they're basically able to interpret that data to give you all of your basically all the data and then give it to you, basically punch out, give you all this information based off your training zones, how your body produces energy and all kinds of things. So another thing about this test is that you have to do it through essentially a coach that will supply it to you. So there's a lot of coaches out there. You can search their website and they'll point you towards coaches that can just basically send you the file. You have to pay that coach to use the program, and then they'll send you the file, and that's kind of how it works. So it's not something that you can do directly through this company. You have to kind of do it through a coach. And then typically what happens is with the test, the coaches give you some type of consult, so then they're able to go over the data with you really in detail so you actually understand what all this information is about. So I have no affiliation with INSCYD. I'm not being paid. I paid for this test, full hog. The lab I'm doing it through is the same lab that I did my VO2 run test through with the ventilator in their lab, but they offered this remote test. So I was want to give this a try, and really excited. So come along, let's give it a shot. We'll see how accurate this is, and then I'll show you all the other data that this thing's going to punch out. So let's go. So like I said before, the first day I just did the 20-second effort and then the 12-minute effort. One thing I very quickly realized is that as a triathlete only for probably the past about 3 years, I haven't done any actual sprinting in forever, and I forgot how much it sucks. 20-second effort is just, it's a hard sprint, just full gas as much as you can give it, and it hurts in a weird way that I am just not used to. So
went through this 20-second effort. It hurt a lot, and then you do a long cool down. Basically, they want you to be as recovered as possible, and then on to the 12-minute effort, which again, 12-minute effort hurts. You're just really grinding it out, putting as much power as I could for the 12-minute effort. Pretty straightforward. Finished up that number, was happy with it, and then came back the next day and moved on to that 3 and 6 minute. For me, I think the 3-minute effort honestly is probably the hardest, because it's long enough to where you can really go, essentially full gas. But it's short enough to where you can essentially go full gas, but long enough to where you just have to sustain it. So that's a hard effort. That hurts. The 3-minute one really hurt a lot. And then same thing with the 6-minute effort, just seated full gas just as long as you can. And pretty straightforward, easy test as far as the testing protocol goes. It's not anything groundbreaking. So got those efforts done and then sent everything off and got the data back.
All right, so I finally got all my test results back, sent it off, and just had my consult with the coach. And I'm super excited about how much information this test just gave me. I'm super excited about how I can use it and all the things. So first of all, let's just get maybe what most of you guys are concerned about, the VO2 Max calculator. Garmin estimated my bike VO2 Max at 63. You can go back to my last test and kind of see how close it was for my run. But Garmin for my cycling has my run or cycling VO2 Max at 63. I believe it just uses power, heart rate data. I don't know if it uses speed. I don't know how Garmin is estimating the VO2 for cycling. Assuming probably just heart rate, power, or maybe just power. But this test, interesting enough, estimated my VO2 max at 53. So 10-point difference. Again, that's pretty far off. Interesting for my Run V02 Max, it actually underestimated my VO2, and this seems to have overestimated my VO2 by quite a bit. I don't really have, well, actually, no, I don't really have any good theories as to why or how it's done that, but it's pretty far off. And like I said, in my last video, a lot of people brought up the fact that it's all relative, if you're using the same data point to measure if you're using this to measure your fitness, a move up or down is still a move up or down. It's all relative. If you're using the same set of data to measure against the same set of data, you can still kind of get a ballpark, but truthfully, VO2 max by itself, in my opinion, it's just kind of useless. It's not really, it's a neat thing to know because it kind of gives you an idea of your fitness, but when it comes down to training and racing and all this stuff, it's a useless number by itself. It's a number that's just really useless by itself. So this test, really what I wanted was all the other information I was going to get. So I got it and very excited. So let's go ahead. I'm going to show you kind of all the data that this test gave you through. So first of all, the test, pretty straightforward. Since this was a lab that I had already done a DEXA with, they already had all my body composition information. So they do need, they need a general body composition to do this test correctly. So since they already had my exact body composition from 3-4 months ago, they were able to just plug that data in there. So that was able to get very accurate. So your first chart is basically just, I don't know what you want to call this chart, but basically gives you, I don't know, this star-shaped pattern of where your body fat, relative VO2 max, VLA max, anaerobic threshold, and your absolute and relative anaerobic threshold. So, and then this is another chart that just gives you that other information just broken down by itself with these little speedometer looking things. One thing that is very interesting, this little one on the bottom right, is my available glycogen, which essentially is saying if I don't eat anything, if I just start exercising, that is the amount of energy that I have stored in my legs to do work without ever taking on any carbs. So that, coupled with some other information that this test will give me, is super useful to know for fueling strategies for especially the longer races, the half Ironman distance that I'm going to do later in the year. Olympic distance, nutrition isn't so much of a problem. you have that much energy in your body. But everything else, so it'll give me my VO2 max, obviously 53 is, what's also interesting too is my Run VO2 Max was 63. So there's a big difference between my Run and Bike VO2 Max. And I asked this coach, hey, is this normal? Is there an error somewhere? Well, what happened? And she said, yeah, that is pretty normal to see for two reasons. The test that she said that the protocol that they ran me through for my Run VO2 Max was a treadmill step test, incline. So they basically, not only did they increase the speed, but they did incline to get me to basically work. And she said that that test in particular does tend to produce on the higher end of what your VO2 max is, just because the way the test works and the incline. So the reason they do that, and I asked her, well, why don't you just do speed? And she basically said, it's still a lab that they have the general population coming into. And she said, it's kind of a safety factor because they don't want someone sprinting a 4-minute mile who really probably can't run a 4-minute mile and tripping up and just getting shot out the back of the treadmill. So they do an incline test to get someone to be able to work hard without the risk factor. So I understand it. That she said it's still a very valid data point. Like, it doesn't mean that test is invalid, but she said comparatively to a just flat treadmill test, that test will maybe produce a little bit higher VO2 number. And then also your bike VO2 in general is just a lower number. You're recruiting less muscle. As you're running, your arms are swinging. This thing keeps beeping at me. You're just recruiting more muscle, which creates a higher VO2 max. On the bike, especially on a trainer, when you're static, you're really not even having to like hold yourself up or balance. Your VO2 will be a little bit lower. So she said, again, like, she would like to see those numbers closer to each other. That's kind of an indicator of, probably a better triathlete. So that's part of why I did this test, is probably at this moment, I'm a little bit stronger runner than I am cyclist. And that's kind of always been my thought. And also my annoyance, because I don't necessarily like running as much as I do like cycling. But ironically, I tend to kind of just be a better runner. So there's that. VLA Max, again, they give you all this stuff. I'm not a sports scientist. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but essentially your VLA Max is your anaerobic power. Your kind of your anaerobic engine, your high-end top sprint engine. I have actually 0.7 is a very high number for someone that does triathlon, apparently. She said typically you want to see that number 0.5 to 0.3 on the lower end. And why that matters is essentially the way it was described to me and the way we talked about it is it's kind of like a teeter-totter. As that anaerobic engine comes up, my aerobic engine actually will struggle to come up. It'll actually kind of come down. So it's a trade-off of energy systems in your body. So a high VLA max is not great for someone that does triathlon. And this is interesting to know because obviously the way that I've been training, I've probably been focusing a little bit too much on high-end hard efforts, which I have built up that high-end sprint speed that I'm probably never going to need and never going to use for a triathlon. So now I have to kind of readjust my training to better suit the needs of what I'm going to be racing. The anaerobic threshold, that is, it's not an FTP, but it is the number that I guess would most closely relate to an FTP. 209, 210, I could round it up just to make it easy, but 209 is where that's at. She said typically those numbers will be less than your FTP for a few reasons. A lot of times FTP is overestimated, especially for someone like me who has a big anaerobic engine apparently. If I do a ramp test, I can kind of overcompensate because I have a lot of apparently anaerobic power, so I can kind of probably push myself harder than what that engine actually is. And I don't do the ramp test. Kind because a lot of people have stated it will overstate your FTP, but even the test that I did do earlier in the year was a 2 8-minute efforts averaged out. And then I did that test and it gave me an FTP about 220. So it's not massively different, but you know, this MLSS is the zone that is used to kind of help settle my actual training zones. So now my training zones have come down. So kind of means that a lot of this early season, I've maybe been training a little bit harder than I should have, which means I've built up my VLA Max. Your Fatmax is basically your ability to burn fat. Carbmax, your body's ability to burn carbs. At what wattage you're burning the most carbs. At 163, my body is burning 100% carbs. That's all I'm burning. That number needs to come down. My Fatmax needs to come up. Kind of all that stuff needs to, I've kind of built an engine that's not great for the racing that I'm doing, basically is what this test is telling me. And then as you scroll down, it gives you, more graphs, more charts, my oxygen demand. As those two things come apart, it's essentially saying my oxygen demand versus my oxygen uptake, or my ability to, maintain that demand. As those decouple, that's bad. So this interesting one is the lactate recovery and accumulation. This little gray line here is essentially my body's ability to recover lactate. So as I'm producing it, it's my ability to uptake it. So she gave me really hard numbers, but if you zoom in here, you can kind of see, at about 130-ish watts is where my body's ability to uptake the most lactate is, and that's kind of smack dab in the middle of zone 2. And then as you come further and further and further down, obviously I'm producing more lactate. I'm not able to uptake it. And then you get past 109, which would be my MLSS. That is now how I'm accruing lactate. I'm just producing it and I'm not able to wash it out. This all might be a bit in the weeds for some people, over your head, you don't care. But this test is why I did it, because it's fascinating and all this information is very good to know. Because you can look at very specific wattages also and say, really, like, how long can I hold that wattage? Like, this test will give you, in a number sense, if you're able to mentally deal with it, in a number sense, how long can you hold a wattage as you're producing this lactate at 0.05, 0.1, 0.12, whatever it is. You know that at some point you're going to produce too much over a set amount of period that you're going to collapse. And then at what wattage can I drop down to start recovering that back down? It's super interesting. Same thing here. This is essentially a similar graph, just listed differently. And then this chart, this fat and carb combustion, it gives me at what wattages I'm burning the most fat, and then at what wattages I'm burning carbs, and how much carbohydrate I need to take in. So obviously, as that chart goes up, you can't uptake that much carbs, but then it gives you these little zones of, okay, I need to be able to uptake this much to maintain that power. These two graphs are basically the same thing, just listed differently. So this is another one that's very interesting. And I have very specific numbers at a very set, at a very set power. How much do I need to eat at what percentage of carb versus fat maybe? Well, you don't need to take in fat. Your body can burn its own fat. But at what wattage do I need to be eating X amount of carbs at a very, on my very specific level, as opposed to just like the general 60 to 100 or, whatever kind of people shoot for. I know exactly at this wattage, I need to take in this much because I'm burning this much. Super interesting, very good for fueling strategies for the longer races. Again, these are all, and then it just gives you more charts about explaining this if the coach didn't go over it with you. More charts, basically, more charts. This will give you my actual numbers on kind of what I did during the test. My 20-minute power, my average power was 738. This one would have been, that's duration. So that would have been the 12-minute effort. My 12-minute effort was, 228. These two would be probably my 3-minute effort, I'm assuming. That's 296. And then my 6-minute effort was 245.
Last and most important graph is this graph that actually breaks up all of my individual training zones. So based off of my MLSS and the formula that they've used to basically set training zones. I get this nice little chart with all of my training zones. It sets the upper and lower limits, and also like your target limits, which is typically like right in the middle of those two limits. And then off to the right, you get these little boxes essentially explaining exactly what those zones are, as far as like percentage of VO2, your percentage of VLA max, the carbohydrate you're burning, and some of them, the lactate concentration, and then also your heart rate. So they can actually change around the physiological conditions. There's more data. If I needed it, I could ask, say, hey, like I want to know what exactly this zone's doing. For this, they could kind of change that stuff around. But this is maybe one of the more important graphs that you get from this whole test is now I have all my training zones, so I can enter all this stuff into my training and basically control how I'm training and train the best. So
interesting enough for this test, I did kind of find out what I did suspect is that the power meter on my tri-bike is a stages power meter, does read, and I don't have any excuse, it reads a little bit lower than my other two power meters. And the reason I bring this up is if you're like me, I have 3 power meters. I have 2 bikes, so one has the stages on it, one has a SRAM crank meter, and then I have the power meter on my trainer. The trainer power meter and my SRAM have been very close. Those are always pretty spot on. This one tends to be about 10 watts lower, which is not, I don't care about the numbers, but it's good to know because this is the bike I'm going to be racing and doing most of my training on. And I want that data to be consistent throughout the whole thing. So I don't care about, again, like it goes back to the point of, I need to use the same marker or the same data point as I go forward. So if I hop on my other road bike and start doing all my training on my road bike, I need to know, hey, this number is not that number. All of a sudden I'm putting out, great numbers. No, the numbers haven't changed. The power meter's changed. So you need to make sure if you're going to do this test that whatever you use to do the test on is the bike, the power meter, the position that you're going to be kind of doing your racing and your training in. So your data is consistent as you move forward. So like I said, I don't care about the actual number itself being lower. I just need to know that this number needs to stay consistent as I train. So that's kind of that. But in general, I'm very, very excited to do this test. It's very interesting to kind of see how my engine is built. All the data and everything like this. It's fascinating. And kind of going forward, kind of my training strategies are going to change. I went over with the coach, did the consult, and we both kind of picked some strategies and said, here's what I'm doing now. How can I better change it? And really what it comes down to is I've done very polarized training for the past probably 3 years. Kind of the 80-20 everyone talks about. And I'm probably going to shift to more of a pyramidal training where I'm going to be adding in kind of some sweet spot stuff, not doing as much VO2 max because I've kind of built that engine I've kind of overbuilt that engine right now. So I really need to work on bringing up that low end power and kind of develop that engine more. So I think that goes in hand with my training zones have probably been a little bit high, which is I think a common problem when you're doing your own FTP tests. And if you're not constantly validating that stuff, FTP numbers, I think everyone just wants to have a high FTP. So you just try to overestimate it. And apparently I have done that as well. So now all my training zones have also come down a little bit. And now my training itself, I'm going to take out not all of the high-end work, but some of that high-end work and substitute it with some sweet spot work and also some like low cadence sweet spot work. Apparently that's very good for bringing that VLA max down is like low cadence work. So doing, intervals, doing hill repeats, that kind of that medium wattage or so, but turning, 50, 60 RPM. Can do that on a hill or I can do it on a trainer, whatever works, but just kind of low cadence work and also dieting. Might experiment with some fasting rides, things like that. All these things to kind of help bring my Fatmax up, bring that Carb Max down, and then, bring VLA Max down. So super interesting data. Like I said, it's a great test. If you are interested and serious about doing training, I would suggest doing this. It's like I said, it gives you almost too much data at some point. You know, like you really need to either be working with a coach probably more than just a 30-minute consult, or really be willing to do your own homework. I've done, like I said, I enjoy the process of self-coaching at this point. It's hard for me to work with a dedicated training strategy because I got a kid, and making sure he's, oh, well, he's waking up. So, but just making sure that, you know, you're really doing your homework. If you're going to do this test, it probably is going to require a lot of homework, or it's going to require you to kind of do a little more work with the coach to really help you kind of dial it in and understand it all. But that's my calling card to go. Little buddy is waking up, so this video, I'm going to wrap it up. Appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully it's been useful. Follow along. Race season starts literally in a few days. I'm excited to finally start racing and stop doing testing and these videos about nothing more than just training and testing. So I gotta go. Kid's crying. Have a good one. I hope you enjoy the video. Like and subscribe and do all the things, and follow some links to the sponsors that help me out. See you guys next time. Bye.